We pick up in part 2 of our look at urban geography with the second urban revolution. The second urban revolution picks up with some ideas introduced at the end of the first urban revolution, like trade and citizenship and capitalism. In the late 1700s, we were experiencing the early years of the Industrial Revolution, places like England, as our economy was transforming from manual labor into machine produced products. We started to see not only an urban transformation, but also a social transformation. So this revolution was introduced by power, technology, mass production. These concepts that are still with us today transformed cities that were changing a little bit at the end of the first urban revolution into something totally different in the second urban revolution. This is our downtown area during our second urban revolution. You'll recall that in the first urban revolution, we saw the transition from temenos to guilds and markets. In our second urban revolution, we see now that the center of our downtown areas were filled with what were known as slums, low cost, mass produced housing, high density, very much clustered together. We saw the introduction of the railroad. So now our transportation in and out of the city was much faster than ever before, was much more efficient than ever before, could move goods and people at unprecedented rates. And again, no longer did we have the guild or the market or the temenos. Now we had the factory. These spatial attributes transformed our cities. The introduction of power, mass production, transformed our cities, economically and socially. This is an image from the mid-1800s in Manchester, England. This site of congestion, high-density development, pollution was new. People didn't recognize it. The social transformation in the second urban revolution was just as abrupt as the economic transformation, just as abrupt as the physical transformation of our cities. Again, the second urban revolution was relatively short, especially considering the duration of our first revolution. But the introduction of mass production, working, living in congested downtown spaces was new, and it carried into our third revolution. Our third revolution picks up about 50 years ago, after 1970. So our second revolution lasted from the end of the 1700s through about 1970. We saw advancements in manufacturing, advancements in mass production, but the similarities between the late 1700s in our early factory cities and those in our Rust Belt cities in North America in the 1960s, those similarities were in place. The way we produced, social life, similar. But in the post-1970s era, we saw a major shift in our cities. And globalization was the driving force behind this shift. In previous chapters, we discussed outsourcing. We discussed how corporations were able to move their industrial practices to parts of the world where low-cost labor existed. So this was not only an economic change, it was also an urban change. Globalization helped facilitate all of these connections, thousands of miles apart around the world. Industrialization saw mass-producing factories pop up in parts of the world where it previously didn't exist, parts of the world that were previously had economies and social life based on agriculture. So we see this transformation. We see these two driving forces, globalization and industrialization. While our first urban revolution took off in the modern-day Middle East and the Fertile Crescent, our second urban revolution started out in England and Western Europe and then spread to North America. This third revolution is found everywhere. And where we see the most rapid change is in our developing countries. You'll recall how we define developing countries, countries that are seeing rapid economic growth, countries that are transitioning from an agricultural-based economy to a manufacturing-based economy, and countries that are seeing increases and improvements in human index measures like gender equality, education, quality of life. So we're seeing this third revolution impact all areas, all spots around the world. This chart from the reading, from the short reading, shows us the transformation that's occurring around the world. This is the percentage of people that are living in urban areas. You'll notice in 1950, we were just under 30% of people around the world lived in cities. In our more developed regions, in places like the United States and Western Europe, we saw that over half of people were living in these metro areas. At our previous census in 2010, we saw that just over 50% of people lived in cities. And in our more developed region, it was over 75%, so 3 out of every 4 people in our more developed areas. And in our developing regions, we see the rapid growth from about 1 in 6 to nearly half. And by mid-century, we expect this rapid growth to continue. The growth won't be as significant in our more developed regions because our populations, urban populations, are relatively saturated, but we still expect this rapid growth happening in our developed areas. And these numbers, again, they tell us a little bit about change, they tell us a little bit about population figures, but they also mean that we should expect significant economic and social transformations along with these increases in populations. When we look at the third revolution, we focus on 5 characteristics. The first, which I just mentioned, is rapid change. Why is this happening? Again, get back to industrialization. Industrialization creates economic opportunities. So people are able to move into urban areas where factories, where sites of manufacturing are introduced, and we see this rapid shift in our populations. Now, this has occurred for hundreds of years. This happened in England when cities like Manchester and Liverpool and London industrialized and attract people from the countryside. This happened in North America when cities like Fall River, Massachusetts had early mill power, attracted people from around New England. How port cities like Baltimore attracted people from up and down the East Coast. But what we're finding now that makes this so much different is that we're not talking about countries with populations ranging from hundreds of thousands to a few million. We're talking about countries now with populations of 1 billion or more. So the rapid change reflects what happened in the past in the second revolution, but it's now occurring on such a large scale that this population shift is unprecedented in size. The economic integration is also driving this rapid change because no longer are we just producing for a state, local, regional economy. We are now producing for the world in our different sites of manufacturing. So this graphic on your screen shows you where growth is occurring the most in the most rapid manner. You see the areas in red that are experiencing the most rapid growth rates, heavily concentrated in East Asia, also found in South Asia and in some parts of sub-Saharan Africa. These again are areas that are experiencing rapid industrialization, rapid population shift from rural areas to urban areas. Places like China and India have their 2 largest populations, and these places are becoming increasingly integrated in the global economy. A prime example of this rapid change can be found in a city called Yu, China. The Yu market, which you see on your screen right now, is the largest commodity wholesale market in the world. This area was built around low-cost items. You'll see some of the stalls that are found in this mall. You'll see the image on the left, kids' toys, relatively inexpensive. You'll see on the right, ceramic mugs, something that you might find in dollar stores today. So Yu China started out in the 1980s with a few hundred stalls. It was a relatively rudimentary place. Before that, it was basically a flea market found in the interior of China. But over the last 35, 40 years, you has industrialized. So now people are producing here and then selling through the wholesale market. We've seen increased connections, economic and transportation connections. We're seeing the introduction of rail. This train, which is a few years old, was the first freight train from China to the UK. Think about that. It spans almost the entire eastern hemisphere of the earth. It tracks the old Silk Road from the 13th century, where early trade made people like Marco Polo famous. But this train, again, took a tremendous commitment by many countries to support the industrialization and growth of China. Is growing rapidly, and we're seeing the social transformation. The image on your screen is a mosque. The Muslim faith was banned and prohibited through much of China, and Muslims are often discriminated against, sometimes harshly in the country. But has become such an international force that China has loosened some of its laws, some of its reactions to outsiders. And you see how rapidly this city grew. 1955, there were 22,000 people. Again, it was basically a flea market set up on a swamp. By 1985, there was 182,000 people. A few years ago, that number exceeded 1.5 million. Almost 1,000% increase over 30 years. And as has grown, it has become more socially and culturally complex. So it's not uncommon to see sites like this. Middle Eastern restaurants, Middle Eastern culture, outdoor dining, hookahs, found, again, in this central Chinese city of Here's an aerial shot from 1984. Again, found in a relatively rural area. You can see around the center of the screen some congestion, some activity. You see a lake to the north. And then by 2016, we see this massive urban conglomeration. As you near the end of the calendar year, we start to recognize how our cultural landscape shifts as we get into holiday season. Which again doesn't celebrate Christmas per se, is home to 600 factories that make over 60% of the world's Christmas decorations. You can see the image on your screen of a young man. Again, reflects that rural to urban migration patterns that we're finding. This young man moved from a rural area for the opportunity presented in the city of Another picture again shows us this relatively low-cost manufacturing that has been outsourced to countries like China. Here's an image from the market, the wholesale market. Looks like any store you'll go to this time of year, any department store like Target or Walmart or Michael's that sells Christmas decorations. Again, over half of these, 60% or so, are produced in this small conglomeration of factories in China. So the labor and the demand match. Again, we see this massive rural to urban migration as people are looking for jobs. Our second example is one we looked at previously this term. The UAE has grown very fast because of natural gas and oil resources. The result of this is a tremendous amount of investment in rapid growth in population and wealth. The Palm Jumeirah, which you see on your screen, is an artificial network of barrier islands. As the city expanded and people grew their economic foundation and they grew their economic opportunities, there was a demand for housing, and there was such affluence here that the city, Dubai, simply expanded out into the water and grew miles of waterfront properties and villas. Not only housing, but also a massive transformation of the city center. And we see an indoor ski slope. We see a waterfront canal reminiscent of Venice or South Florida. And we see a skyline at the top that has evolved in the 21st century. This growth matches the characteristics of this third urban revolution. The pace of industrialization and urbanization is truly unprecedented.